The moon hid its face that terrible night. We villagers stood by the riverbank, our torches trembling in our hands like frightened children. Young Obinna's body floated face up in the water, his eyes wide open, his mouth frozen in a scream that would haunt our dreams forever. The River Nzu glowed red beneath him, as if the earth itself was bleeding. We had heard his scream hours earlier, piercing through the forest like a wounded animal. Now he was silent, and so were we. The drums that had been beating all evening suddenly stopped. A thick mist began rising from the water, curling around our feet like ghostly fingers. Then we heard it. A woman's voice, soft and beautiful, humming a lullaby that made our skin crawl. The mist parted slowly, and through it, we saw her. A figure stood on the water itself, her long hair dripping, her eyes glowing like wet pearls in the darkness. She was beautiful, yes, but something about her smile was wrong. Too wide. Too knowing. She tilted her head and looked directly at us. Then she whispered words that froze our blood. The debt must be paid. Let me take you back, my children, to where this darkness truly began. 6 months before that terrible night, our village was dying. The River Nzu, which had fed our ancestors for generations, was turning black. Fish floated belly up on the surface, rotting in the sun. Our crops withered. Our children grew thin. The water we drank tasted like metal and death. The elders gathered under the sacred irako tree, their faces grave with worry. They performed rituals, slaughtered goats, poured libations to our ancestors. Nothing worked. The river continued to die, and we died with it. Some whispered that the gods had abandoned us, that we had committed some terrible sin. Others spoke of curses from neighboring villages. Fear spread like disease through Umuaka. Then one morning, just as the sun broke through the clouds after weeks of drought, something impossible happened. Mist rose from the dying river, thick and white like morning fog. We gathered to watch, confused and afraid. The mist swirled and danced, forming shapes that almost looked human. And then she stepped out. A woman, barefoot and dripping wet, walking on air itself. She was the most beautiful thing we had ever seen. Her skin glowed like moonlight on water. Her hair fell in long, dark waves down to her waist. She wore a wrapper made of what looked like woven mist and river foam. When she smiled at us, flowers seemed to bloom in her wake. The elders fell to their knees immediately, recognizing what she must be. Mwanyi Miri, they whispered with reverence. The woman of water. She walked through our village slowly, touching the dry earth with her bare feet. Wherever she stepped, grass sprang up green and fresh. She hummed softly as she moved, a melody that made our hearts feel light and our worries fade. Children ran to her, laughing. She blessed them with gentle touches to their foreheads. That very evening, rain fell for the first time in months. Soft, warm rain that smelled like answered prayers. The River Nzu began flowing clear again. Fish returned to its waters. Our crops drank deeply and stood tall once more. We praised her. We thanked her. We called her our savior. Only one person in the entire village felt uneasy. Her name was Adaora. Adaora was the daughter of our late river priestess, a girl of 17 with her mother's sharp eyes and questioning mind. While everyone else danced and celebrated, Adaora watched the maiden from the shadows. Something about her felt wrong, though Adaora could not explain why. One evening, as the sun set over the revived river, Adaora followed the maiden to the water's edge. The maiden stood alone, singing that same beautiful melody. But as Adaora watched, her blood ran cold. The maiden's lips moved, yes, but her reflection in the water sang differently. The reflection's mouth opened wider, revealing too many teeth. It sang in a deeper, older voice. And most terrifying of all, when the maiden turned her head to look at a bird, her reflection did not move. It continued staring straight ahead, smiling that too wide smile. Then, as if sensing Adaora's presence, the maiden turned. "Hello, "Child," she said sweetly, her smile flickering for just a moment before returning, wider than before. "Did you come to sing with me?" Adaora stumbled backward, her heart hammering. Behind the maiden, the reflection slowly turned its head toward Adaora, still smiling. Days passed, and the village grew more prosperous than ever. But strange things began happening. A farmer's child fell deathly ill with a fever that burned like fire. The parents brought him to the maiden, begging for help. She knelt beside the boy, placed her cool hand on his forehead, and sang her melody. The child's eyes opened. The fever broke. He sat up, smiling and healthy. The entire village erupted in grateful celebration. That night, Adaora couldn't sleep. She heard singing outside her hut, the same melody, and followed it. Under the full moon, she saw the healed child walking toward the river. His eyes were open but seeing nothing, his feet moving as if pulled by invisible strings. "Stop!" Adaora screamed, running toward him. But before she could reach him, he walked straight into the water and disappeared beneath the surface without a sound. Adaora dove in after him, searching desperately, but found nothing. When she surfaced, gasping and crying, the villagers pulled her out. They told her she must have dreamed it, that the child was home sleeping. But the next morning, the boy was gone. By the riverbank, Adaora found his small leather shoe, still dripping wet. Adaora knew she needed answers. She went to visit Eek, an old storyteller who had been exiled to the forest's edge years ago for speaking against the elders. His hut was small and dark, filled with carved masks and ancient scrolls. Eek listened to Adaora's story with growing concern. "Not all blessings from the river are truly blessings," he said quietly, his old eyes distant with memory. "Your mother knew this. That is why she sealed the old shrine before she died." He told Adaora of an ancient curse, one passed down through whispered stories. Long ago, a river goddess had fallen deeply in love with a mortal man. But he betrayed her, choosing another woman. Mad with grief and rage, the goddess cursed the land, demanding souls as payment for her broken heart. Adaora's ancestor, the first river priestess, had trapped this vengeful spirit in the river's depths using powerful rituals. But such bindings never last forever, Eek warned. They weaken over time, especially when, he stopped suddenly, his eyes widening. Outside the hut, someone was humming the maiden's melody. But the voice sounded exactly like Eek's own. His lips were not moving. That night, Adaora's dreams turned dark. She found herself underwater, unable to breathe, sinking deeper into River Nzu's cold embrace. All around her, faces floated in the murky water. Pale faces with empty eyes, their mouths opening and closing, whispering her name. "Adaora! Adaora, help us!" They reached toward her with waterlogged fingers. She recognized some of them. The sick child. A young hunter who had disappeared last month. A girl from the neighboring village. When Adaora jolted awake, screaming, she felt wetness on her face. At first, she thought it was tears. But when she touched her hair, it was soaking wet, dripping river water onto her sleeping mat. She had never left her hut. She hadn't been near water. Yet her clothes clung to her body, drenched. Terrified, Adaora ran to the river as dawn broke. She knelt by the water's edge and stared at her reflection. For a moment, everything seemed normal. Then she saw them. Dozens of pale hands reaching up from beneath the surface, grasping toward her reflection. And one hand wore a familiar bronze bracelet, her mother's bracelet, buried with her body 3 years ago. Adaora knew what she had to do. Her mother's shrine had been sealed since her death, forbidden to enter. But Adaora needed answers more than she feared breaking taboos. That night, she crept through the village to the old shrine, hidden behind thick bush. The wooden door was marked with warning symbols carved by her mother's own hand. Adaora whispered an apology to her mother's spirit and pushed the door open. Inside, dust floated in the moonlight streaming through cracks in the roof. Sacred objects lined the walls, covered in cobwebs. Adaora found what she was looking for, rolled scrolls written in her ancestor's hand, the ink faded but still readable. The words spoke of a curse, a binding ritual, and a price paid in blood. On the shrine's back wall hung a large mural, painted centuries ago. It showed a woman chained beneath water, her face twisted in rage and sorrow. Strange glowing symbols surrounded her. Adaora's breath caught. On the woman's neck was a mark, a crescent moon wrapped in water. The exact same mark she had seen on the maiden's neck. "You shouldn't have seen that," a voice said softly behind her. Adaora spun around. The maiden stood in the doorway, her body glowing faintly in the darkness. But her expression was not angry. It was almost sad. "You seek answers about your mother," the maiden said, stepping closer. Her voice was gentle, almost motherly. "I understand. Loss is a heavy burden, especially for one so young." She moved gracefully through the shrine, touching the sacred objects with familiar ease. "Your mother was special, Adaora. She understood the river better than anyone. She spoke to me often, you know. Before she died." Adaora's hands trembled. "What are you?" The maiden smiled sadly. "I am what your people made me. I am hope when there is drought. I am blessing when there is curse. I am the answer to desperate prayers." She reached out her hand toward Adaora. "Join me, child. Stop fighting what must be. If you serve me willingly, I can return your mother's spirit to you. You can speak with her again. Hold her again." For a moment, just one terrible moment, Adaora wanted to believe her. The maiden's eyes seemed sincere, her voice warm. But then Adaora noticed something. The maiden's reflection in the shrine's polished brass bowl was smirking, even though the maiden herself looked earnest and kind. The next full moon, the maiden declared the river angry. She stood before the gathered village, her face grave with divine concern. "The spirits are restless," she announced, her voice carrying across the crowd. "They demand blood to restore balance. Without it, the river will die again, and all of you with it." Fear rippled through the villagers. They had tasted prosperity and could not bear to lose it again. The elders quickly organized a blood-offering ceremony. Goats, chickens, even a bull were brought to the riverbank. As the villagers chanted and the animals were slaughtered, something terrible happened. The rain that fell from the clear sky was not water. It was red. Crimson drops splattered on the ground, on our faces, on the river's surface. The maiden stood in the center of it all, her face tilted toward the sky, her mouth open. She drank the red rain like it was the sweetest wine, her eyes closed in pleasure. Adaora watched in horror from behind a tree. The maiden was feeding. The blood from the sacrifices, the fear from the villagers, the desperation in the air, she was consuming it all. Then Adaora saw something that made her stomach turn. Beneath the river's surface, a body floated, its eyes open. And its chest was still moving. Adaora found Eek 3 days later, collapsed near his burned hut. His skin was blistered, his breathing shallow. "She came for me," he whispered as Adaora gave him water. "I knew too much." Before he died, he told Adaora the complete story. Centuries ago, the river goddess had been beautiful and kind, beloved by all. She fell in love with a mortal priest, a man of great spiritual power. They planned to marry, to bridge the world of spirits and humans. But the priest's family forbade it. They arranged for him to marry a human woman instead. On the wedding night, the goddess appeared, heartbroken and pleading. The priest turned her away, declaring he had chosen mortality over divinity. In her rage and grief, the goddess cursed the entire land. Rivers dried. Crops failed. Children died. Adaora's ancestor, the first priestess, had no choice. She performed a terrible ritual, binding the goddess's spirit to the river, trapping her in eternal hunger. But here's what your mother discovered, Eek gasped, clutching Adaora's hand. The goddess didn't die. She split into two. One half remained trapped. The other half. He pulled out a charred piece of bark with an ancient carving. The face carved there looked exactly like Adaora's mother. Adaora's hand flew to her neck. There, just below her ear, was a birthmark she had always had, a crescent moon shape. In the dark, she had never noticed it before, but now, standing near the river, it glowed faintly with pale light. The same mark as the maiden. The same mark as the chained goddess in the mural. Her blood ran cold as understanding crashed over her. The curse wasn't just bound to her family. It was bound to her bloodline itself. The goddess's split soul had woven itself through generations, waiting, growing stronger with each daughter born. Adaora was part of the curse. If she died, the maiden would be free forever, unchained from the river, able to consume the entire world. But if Adaora lived, the maiden would eventually possess her completely, using her body as a vessel. The only way to end it was to break the cycle entirely. And that meant sacrifice. The maiden's voice suddenly echoed in Adaora's mind, though she was nowhere near. I can feel your fear, child. I can taste it on the wind. You're beginning to understand, aren't you? We are two halves of the same cursed whole. When Adaora returned to Eek's hut the next morning to ask more questions, she found only ashes. The entire structure had burned to nothing overnight, so thoroughly that even the stone foundation was blackened. In the center of the destruction lay Eek's wooden staff, half-charred, covered in strange carved symbols that seemed to shift when Adaora looked at them directly. The staff was warm to the touch, almost alive. Adaora remembered her mother carrying a similar staff during rituals. She picked it up carefully, and immediately felt a pulse run through her arm, like a heartbeat. The symbols began to glow faintly. Adaora remembered something from the scrolls she had read. The staff of the first priestess was said to hold the power to seal spirits, carved from a sacred tree that grew between the world of the living and the dead. Could this be it? Testing her theory, Adaora carried the staff to the river's edge. The moment it touched the water, it hummed, a deep vibration that traveled up through her bones. The water around it began to swirl, revealing glimpses of faces beneath, trapped souls crying out silently. The maiden's reflection appeared on the water's surface, even though she was nowhere in sight. That belongs to me, the reflection hissed. The river's hunger grew worse each night. People began disappearing during sleep, drawn by the maiden's song like moths to flame. But they didn't drown in the traditional sense. Their bodies would wade into the water and simply dissolve, absorbed into the river itself. Their screams would cut off mid-cry as they became part of the water, part of the maiden's growing power. One morning, 5 people were gone. By the next full moon, 12 more. The village was paralyzed with terror, yet still they worshipped the maiden, believing that appeasing her was their only hope. Adaora could bear it no longer. She confronted the maiden in front of the entire village during an offering ceremony. You're killing us. Adaora shouted. You're not a blessing, you're a curse. A hungry spirit feeding on our desperation. The villagers gasped, horrified by her blasphemy. But the maiden only laughed, a sound like wind through hollow trees. Do you think you can stop what your mother began? She stepped closer to Adaora, her eyes glowing. Your mother knew the truth. She tried to stop me once. Look how that ended. The river behind the maiden began to rise, forming a column of water. Within it, a face materialized, transparent and shimmering. Adaora's mother, her expression twisted in eternal sorrow. Adaora, her mother's watery voice called out, echoing strangely. My daughter, listen carefully. I have little time before she pulls me back down. The village fell silent, stunned. Adaora approached the water column with trembling steps, tears streaming down her face. Mama. I must tell you what I never could when I lived, her mother's spirit said quickly. The maiden, she is my twin. Not my sister, but my twin soul. When I was born, the goddess's curse split. Half became me, mortal and good. Half became her, immortal and hungry. Adaora couldn't breathe. Her mother continued, I was the goddess's redemption, a chance to live human and whole. But the cursed half, she was jealous. When I fell in love with your father, when I chose life over power, she raged. To protect you, to protect the village, I performed the ritual to seal her away again. But it cost me my life. The water column began to collapse. The curse can only end one way. You must, but the maiden screamed, and the water exploded. Her beautiful face melted away for just a moment, revealing something ancient and terrible underneath. You carry my other half, Adaora. When I consume you, I will finally be whole. Adaora's dreams that night showed her the way. She saw herself diving deep beneath River Nzu, deeper than any human should survive, to a hidden cavern where the water glowed with its own light. At the cavern's center, suspended in the water, was a pulsing orb of pure luminescence, the river's heart. The ancient scrolls had mentioned it only once, a living piece of the river's soul, the source of its power and its curse. According to the forbidden text, the river's heart could imprison a spirit forever, but only if sealed with blood from the same lineage that created the curse. Adaora's blood. Her sacrifice would end the cycle, but it would also end her life. When she woke, she knew her path. She spent the day preparing, gathering the sacred herbs her mother had taught her about as a child, sharpening her father's old knife, and whispering prayers to ancestors she had never met. As the sun set, she walked to the river. The water parted before her like a welcoming doorway. She descended into the depths, the staff clutched in one hand. The pressure should have crushed her, but the staff protected her, creating a bubble of air. She found the cavern exactly as her dream had shown. And there, gleaming in the center, was the river's heart. On its surface, the maiden's reflection appeared, smiling knowingly. Adaora surfaced from the river at dawn, exhausted but determined. She had found the river's heart, but she needed to understand the ritual more completely before attempting it. She returned to her mother's shrine to study the scrolls one final time. But when she reached the village center, she stopped in horror. The maiden stood surrounded by all the villagers, her face radiating divine sorrow. My beloved children, the maiden announced, her voice quivering with false emotion. I come to you with a heavy heart. Adaora, daughter of the priestess, has angered the gods. She desecrated the sacred shrine. She stole holy objects. She has brought a curse upon you all. The villagers turned to look at Adaora, their faces shifting from confusion to anger. No! Adaora shouted. She's lying. She's the curse. But the maiden pointed at Adaora with a trembling finger. The gods demand her sacrifice to restore balance. If you do not give her to the river willingly, all of you will suffer. The fear in the villagers' eyes turned to desperate determination. Hands grabbed Adaora before she could run. They dragged her to the sacred Irako tree and bound her with ropes, preparing her for sacrifice. Thunder cracked across the suddenly dark sky. Please! Adaora screamed. She is not a goddess. She is hunger. She is death. But no one listened. Rain began to fall as the maiden approached the bound Adaora. The villagers backed away, forming a circle. The maiden placed her cool hand on Adaora's cheek, almost tenderly. I forgive you, she whispered, loud enough for all to hear. Your soul will nourish the river and save your people. But as she leaned closer, she whispered something else, something only Adaora could hear. Thank you for making this easy. As she prepared to cut Adaora's bonds and lead her to the water, something unexpected happened. Adaora's blood, from where the ropes had cut into her wrists, dripped onto the ground. The moment it touched the earth, the ground trembled. The sacred Irako tree's roots began to glow. The river exploded upward in a massive column of water, and from within it, they came. Spirits. Dozens of them. The faces of all the lost villagers, all the consumed souls, rising from the river in ghostly form. They surrounded the maiden, chanting in an ancient language. The maiden's beautiful face contorted in rage and fear. No. You were supposed to be mine forever. Her skin began to crack like dried mud. The beauty melted away like wax, revealing what lay beneath. Scales. Ancient, weathered scales. Eyes that glowed with centuries of hunger. She grew taller, her limbs elongating. Black tears streamed from her eyes as she screamed. Adaora broke free from the loosened ropes and grabbed Eek's staff. The spirits formed a path for her, urging her toward the river. She ran, the maiden's inhuman scream following her like a physical force. Adaora dove into the water, the staff guiding her down to the hidden cavern. The river's heart pulsed before her, waiting. The maiden crashed into the water behind her, no longer beautiful, no longer even trying to pretend. She was massive now, a creature of scale and rage and ancient sorrow. We were one, the maiden howled, her voice distorted and terrible. We could have been whole together. Why do you choose to destroy me? Adaora felt her own life force beginning to fade, pulled toward the river's heart. To seal the curse, she would have to give everything. Her life. Her soul. Her very existence erased to end the cycle. But she understood now. Some prices must be paid. Some sacrifices must be made. Because I choose love over hunger, Adaora whispered. She plunged the staff into the river's heart. Light exploded through the water. The maiden reached for her, their fingers almost touching. The river's heart began to collapse inward, pulling the maiden's screaming form into it. Adaora sang softly, the same melody, but this time the river sang back, harmonizing. The curse began to seal. Dawn broke over Umuaka village. The river lay calm and clear, clearer than anyone could remember. The water sparkled like thousands of tiny diamonds in the morning sun. Villagers emerged from their homes cautiously, confused by the silence. Where was the maiden? Where was Adaora? The river gave no answers. But something had changed. The water felt different, clean, pure, no longer heavy with hunger. Flowers bloomed along the riverbank, flowers that had not grown there in centuries. Children approached the water without fear, and the river welcomed them gently. In the days that followed, the village slowly healed. The consumed souls were not returned, those deaths were permanent, but the nightmares stopped. The drownings ended. The river gave fish and water and life, as it was always meant to do. Some villagers claimed they sometimes heard singing from the river at dawn, a girl's voice, gentle and sad. Others said they saw a figure standing in the mist sometimes, watching over them, protecting them. I stand here now, old and gray, telling you this story so you will remember. Peace always has a price. Adaora paid that price willingly, sacrificing herself to save us all. If only they knew, we all whisper sometimes, if only they knew that not every miracle is holy, that not every beautiful thing is good, that sometimes the brightest waters can drown the soul. Listen to the river. It remembers. It always remembers.